Hi, I'm John Diggs, and I'm about to have a productive conversation with Mike Vardy.
Welcome to A Productive Conversation. I'm Mike Vardy, and I am joined by John Diggs on this episode of the podcast. Now, John is an ex-NFL player. He's turned into a certified love life coach and a mind mapping mentor. He rebounded from his shattered football career and a mortgage industry loss and emerged stronger. Now he champions mapineering, which we're going to get into what that is, and it enhances creativity, memory, productivity, and well-being. Again, we're going to dive deeper into that during our conversation. The role of mind maps alongside a to-do list. Can they replace a to-do list? So many more things. We talk about college stuff and how it can work for college students, how mind mapping can work for pretty much anyone. And using his transformative tool, I Am, and we're going to talk about that method. John guides individuals of all ages to unlock their potential and lead fulfilling lives. It's a great conversation, and I'm so glad to be able to bring it to you. So here is my conversation, and a productive one at that, with John Diggs. John, thanks so much for taking the time to join me today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, man. It's exciting to be here.
So we always have a bit of a preamble before we hit the record button. And for those of you that have listened to this podcast for a while, occasionally, and I've had people on that have worked in sport, have worked with sports. Like we had an episode with DMAC, who's worked with the Arizona Diamondbacks. I've talked to John Lamerton, who's done some stuff with Wooden's group, a whole bunch of different things here. And John and I got to talk about football before we hit record, and it was great because you know, those who know I'm a Bengals fan, and so it was interesting to hear some of the background about John with his football career and stuff. But I want to get into some of this because the books that I'm holding, like you talk about mind maps, and mapineering is a term that you've used. We're going to get into that as we make our way through the conversation today, but right out of the gate, I mentioned this to you before we hit the record button. I would imagine that your background in football lent itself nicely that when you started to look at mind mapping, that there is some like cohesion, some synergy there, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. You know, as a football player, you're used to looking at playbooks that have all of these diagrams of plays, X's and O's and things of that nature. And mind maps are just that, you know, visual diagrams of essentially X's and O's. So it really resonated with me deeply and made a lot of sense. And like looking at those playbooks, knowing what plays I needed to execute effectively to make big plays, you know, that's what I've been using mind maps for, is to visualize certain things I need to do to achieve success. So it's very similar.
Do you use typically software for this, or are you more of a chalkboard, whiteboard, paper kind of guy?
I'm a software guy. Okay. I use mindmeister.com. Yeah. Just because it's just, you know, software. I can do so much more than the pencil and napkin I used to do way back in the days. And like in my TEDx talk that I did last year, I talked about how I actually got big poster boards and, you know, all of that, things of that nature, which is still powerful. If for some reason I don't have a computer or access to the internet or my phone or something, it's still a powerful way to do it, to get my thoughts out of my head onto paper. But yeah, you know, I'm a software tech guy anyway. So naturally, if I have my choice, I'm going to use the online platform.
One of the books that I'm holding is Mapineer Your College Years, an insider's guide to crushing college with mind maps. It's not something that, and my daughter's getting ready to go to college as we're recording this too. Mm-hmm. So this book is going to her as soon as we're done this conversation because nice. She's getting ready to. She's on a bit of a gap year right now, but she's getting ready. So I'm like, here. This is one of the benefits is I get like some of these books. I'm like, here. I don't need this anymore because I'm well past college years. But you go ahead and take it. The idea of mind maps and college, when it comes to that, what are some of the things that you found when you were putting this book together that you think are especially useful for students that are getting into the college game, for lack of a better term? Because I think that a lot of them are, because again, one thing that happens when you leave school is the for lack of a better term, alerts or commands to go from this class to this class to this, like all of a sudden, all the agency is thrust back on you. And there's not a lot of lead up where you are kind of given this agency where you can kind of show up to classes when you want, when you can carve out your path. And I can tell you that my daughter right now is like, she's like, this is a big decision. I've got to, this is on me. So
Yeah.
why do mind maps, and what role can they play in helping you kind of get through those college years and get to where you want to go?
Yeah, great question. And there's several answers. The first that I would say is, first thing about mind maps that I teach that I'm really proud of is called the I am mind map, which I really encourage a lot of students to start with. And that's a mind map that really gets clear on who they are, and who they intend to be throughout their college years. Really make some conscious choices on who they want to be, so they can have, let's say, boundaries to deal with all of the peer pressures, to deal with all of the stuff that college is going to bring them. They can make conscious choices to how they want to be and how they want to show up in college as it relates to being a student and all of that social stuff that comes with that most of us who've been to college, not really clear and concise on who we are, can probably do some things influenced by others that we end up regretting and trying to keep secrets for the rest of our lives. So that's one thing that I think is great about what mind maps can do, is specifically this I am mind map process that I developed, that I walk students to, so they can make conscious choices on what they want to do as far as their health, their wealth, their success, and happiness throughout college. Secondly, mind maps are great for note taking. When you're in your classrooms, they're finding now in Ivy League schools that kids are getting better test scores, because when they note take in the form of mind maps, they can easily recall that information on their notes when it comes time to taking tests. I mean, in this visual nature and this visual environment that we're in now, they can easily close their eyes and visualize where that answer is on their mind map versus that linear note-taking style that we've been used to. So they're finding increased test scores. It's great for collaboration, for project management stuff, for brainstorming, things of that nature is why mind maps are really big when it comes to like book reports. I mean, everything, just being able to take your thoughts out of your head, and put them and have a structured way to put it out in a visual manner will help students with decision making, problem solving, goal setting, dealing with stuff in their past, dealing with, what boyfriend to be with, and whatever that may be. Mind maps can help. So there's a lot of benefits in mind mapping for college students, for sure.
Well, and one of the things that you brought up was they're going again, into a situation where they're on their own, right? So we're often taught, like, finish high school, go right to college. Like, my daughter took a gap year. Right. Gap years are becoming more increasingly common. But to have something, a tool like this, so that you can rely on, not just for the gateway aspect, but to your point, like on a consistent, sustainable basis, I think is huge. And I know that with software, the great thing about it is you've got backlinking, you've got all that. So the connective tissues can be easily recalled and connected, like you're using MindMeister. I know in Obsidian, there's actually a visual you can get of what all your notes look like and how they all connect. And it's such a fascinating, you just see it. It almost looks like, again, it looks like to use Tiago Forte's term, like a second brain, right? Like you get to see kind of the visual aspect of it. A question that I have, though, because I use mind maps, but I typically use them for, again, like just but more to like it's the big picture, right? The big picture stuff. But when we get into the weeds, the details, do you typically also, like, are you using mind maps for the detail oriented things, or are you using mind maps in conjunction with, say, like a to-do list app or something like that to kind of and finding a way to connect those? Because I think for somebody who is still thinking, yeah, but I have a to-do list for that, or yeah, that's great, but I don't think mind maps will work for me in terms of like checking off those boxes of those say small or mundane or inconsequential tasks. So are you using them in conjunction with one another?
I am. And MindMeister company that I'm, full disclosure, a partner with out of Vienna, Austria, they've done an awesome job, because they actually have a sister program to their MindMeister, which is their mind mapping program called Meister Task.
Yep.
So when you're developing your mind maps and stuff, you can actually link that to your task, which is, you can use it as a scrum board, project management, and progress through all of that stuff. So yeah, I use that all in conjunction, all the way down to details. I use my mind maps to get that broad overview of, my game plan, if you will, my playbook. But then I'll link everything into my Meister task for me and my team to really get down to the nitty gritty components of the daily task that needs to be executed. Now that mind maps kind of gave us a compass and a direction on where we need to head, we will link all of that to Meister task to visualize the daily activities that we need to do to fulfill those objectives. That makes sense?
Yeah, totally. And I know Meister Task, and I played with it a bit, as well as MindMeister. And yeah, the connective tissue, the linking, that was important, because there are other tools out there that allow for mind mapping within. I think there's Miro, that's one. There's several of them. I know ClickUp has some mind mapping elements. It's becoming kind of like how you mentioned Scrum, Kanban. Like, people operate differently and they think differently. We're no longer, nothing works in a linear fashion, right? Like, I mean, this is some of the stuff that I talk about regularly. How do you help someone who gets frustrated with the friction of adopting mind maps as a tool, a method, a means to kind of, as you put out in your other book, What's in Your Big Ass Box, mind mapping your way to a life that you love? How do you help someone who's facing friction of, like, because I've seen it where people are like, okay, maybe it's the software piece where they're like, oh, I just can't wrap my head around it. But even without the software, like, I mean, just looking at it from a visual perspective, and they're so used to seeing things in this like list-based form. What are some of the things that you can do or that you teach that will help people with the friction that they might face when they're adopting mind mapping?
Yeah, and it's a great question, because I'm dealing with a lot of student athletes now, and they're young, and and they're kind of trying to sort out a lot of things, and what I just simply do, traditionally I add the software component later when I'm dealing with new people to the concept of mind mapping. I'll just grab a piece of paper and just put a circle in the middle. What's on your mind? Most of them nowadays are dealing with some sort of problem or dealing with some kind of decision. But what I've been doing just simply is just, hey, if it's a problem we're dealing with, let's just title your problem, whatever that is, just a general title. Then around there, I put the subtopics of what, when, why, who, how, and where. I call it the 5 W's and H. And we just kind of walk through that and brainstorm each one of those what's and where's and when's surrounding that central topic. And in that process, I think it opens them up to the power of mind mapping, because then they start to really, once I'm done with that, man, just yesterday, I was dealing with a student athlete who was really kind of stressed and going over some problems and things. And it was amazing just by me walking him through this 5 W's and S mind map, H mind map, you can see his energy just totally shift to where it was almost like the problem was no longer internalized. It was more like externalized. So he kind of detached. So his emotions went down.
Yeah.
He felt more empowered. He saw more possibilities. But then as we went through that whole exercise, you can kind of see it in his face. He had an aha moment because it revealed his solutions. He no longer had that confusion about how do I deal with this? What's going on, just by going through that who, what, where, why, and how of that problem he was dealing with. He was empowered. He was empowered to do it. He felt like, yeah, I can figure this out on my own, which is, to answer your question, this is some of the things that I do with people, is to walk them through something, because everybody's dealing with a problem and some sort of decision that they're vacillating with.
Sure.
So I'll walk them through this problem, I'll walk them through this process. And by them doing that, it turns on a light in their head, like, oh, I can see how mind mapping can benefit me. I can see how, getting what's swirling in my head into a structured visual diagram, I now can see that process to where it's been inspiring people to embrace it more.
Right.
You know what I mean? To be like, hey, let me use this as an alternative, versus sitting there like trying to figure out what to do. Most of my clients and students that I've been working with are now being like, well, hey, let me just mind map this out, and just see where it takes me. Versus sitting there wallowing. Now they have at least a plan or at least an option to do something that they didn't have before.
Well, one of the things that as you know, we're talking about this is that mind mapping by its very nature creates contextualization out of the gate, right? Because there's the center circle, like you talk about, which is where people start with circles, whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah,
and then you've got these
right.
these trees, these branches that go off, which essentially, if you're somebody who has followed like the getting things done methodology or anything like that, these are contextual elements of it. So you're getting like
Right.
the landscape. Now,
Yep.
and it's already kind of divided, but it's divided in a natural way. And
Right.
it's one of those things where, you know, as you were talking about working with student athletes, and again, we were talking about before we hit hit record, the football element. I'm a creative. I used to,
Hmm.
you know, again, I've done as a writer, and even when I was doing comedy, like I would mind map stuff out. Stephen Pressfield talks about like the foolscap method when it comes to writing a book. Do you find
Right.
that creatives, this is where I think creatives and athletes kind of mesh? Like it's where, as much as you hear like the
Yep.
jocks and the drama kids, this is probably where they align in terms of how they
Hmm.
like to see things in a spatial way. Would have you worked with people that are not necessarily like that are in the creative slant, or trying to build these, like, let's say they're building a business that is this creative element? I think this is
Right.
where those two things kind of come together in a way that you may not necessarily expect.
Yep, yep, absolutely. For many years, well, about it's been over a decade now that I was actually being hired to help people actually build their executive summaries and pro formas for their new businesses in mind map form. So, because I would, most people that start the new business, their, pro forma executive summary, and they end up with a Lord of the Rings kind of like book
Mm-hmm.
kind of deal that they never end up going back to reference, which is the whole point of creating one of those, is to reference it as you progress to see, if you're still on track with your initial, thoughts. But when I started teaching people how to build these in mind map form, they found that it was easier to reference as, first, second quarter, to go to that mind map to see if they were still on target, or what adjustments or what needed more attention, and all the things of that nature. So yeah, I've done that a lot, and I see a lot of people, and what's really been, Mike, interesting, is that mind maps can truly impact anything and everything,
Mm-hmm.
that somebody has to think about. Whatever it is that's swirling in your head, a mind map can some way prove useful, to
Mm-hmm.
help you sort something out. There's no limits, to what is possible doing. And to your point about athletes, I just wrote a book. I'm very excited about it. It was an Amazon hot new release list. It's third behind both of the Kelsey books, but it's called Big Play Power, and it essentially shows student athletes how to mind map to make big plays on and off the field. In the book and in my online courses and workshops and things of that nature, I walk student athletes, football players, to map out the biggest play they can make in the playing the game of football. What is that? Let's map that out. Let's go through the who, what, where's, why's, and how's of the biggest play you can make. Once we get clear of that, I walk through the biggest game they can have, the biggest season they can have. So at the end of this whole process, which is a 5-week process, they have 12 different mind maps that's covering pre-game, game, post-game, off-season, preseason, season. I mean, just everything about the game. So they have all of these visual tools that they can quickly reference to, start to internalize and visualize, so they can make sure they're mentally prepared, or mentally as best they can be, before they actually take the field to make big plays. That's why I call it Big Play Power. So, and I'm getting this great feedback from a lot of these parents and student athletes, because most players, man, never really thought about the biggest single play they can make playing whatever game that is. What is the best? We just play,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but to really consciously create that and go to bed and intentionally dream it and visualize making that play every night, naturally is going to increase the chances of you experiencing it. But it'll also do wonders with calming your nerves and making sure you're calm, cool, and collected during the game, because that, hey, I've visualized this situation already. I've imagined it. I've mapped it out. I know it's about to happen, kind of deal. And I use references of Michael Jordan, Michael Phelps, how they use visualization and all that kind of stuff. So very, very powerful. It's called Big Play Power. I'm really excited about that.
We'll link to that in the show notes for sure, because it's interesting. As you were talking about that, I couldn't help but think, and this is not typical of a big play. I'm going to deviate here for a second, but who is that that player for the Chiefs that didn't go into the end zone and score the touchdown in the Super Bowl because he knew that if he stopped at like the 1 yard line and kept the clock running, then that was, which one I'm talking about, right?
I know what player you're talking about. I can't remember his
name. Was it McKinnon? Was it McKinnon? It might have been.
I think it was. That name sounds familiar.
I think it might have been. We'll find that, because there's an actual post about that, and someone said that he didn't score an entire touchdown in the Super Bowl, whoever it was, but he had the wherewithal, the mental, kind of. And this is, I think, when you free your mind up, it opens. Because one of the things that mind maps, I believe, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is it unlocks the capturing bias that, like, the thoughts that we won't necessarily get them out in front of us. One of the biggest challenges that I know people face is, well, why am I writing this down? I'll just remember it. I'll keep it in my head. And I think mind mapping is one of those tools that allows it requires, if not gives permission, to get it out of your head and in front of you, as opposed to a to-do list. Because again, the to-do list is very linear. It's very, again, it's rote. Yeah. Whereas the mind map is. Would you agree with that? Would you? And yeah. So let's dive into that, because I think the capture element, and especially with those questions because it opens up the door. It unlocks that, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as we talked about before, mind maps is very similar to just how our brains function, with connections, with, connecting dots, if you will, versus that linear bullet point aspect that we've been taught mostly in school, is not conducive to how our brains work.
Or the calendar, or the calendar. Yeah, or putting it on the calendar for a due date, which creates a whole other thing, because often it's unrealistic. Right. Like you're just putting them, it becomes arbitrary, right?
Yeah, exactly. Which is like that book that you have, What's in Your Big Ass Box, is a book that's really kind of getting people to realize that, when somebody says, think outside the box, basically what they're saying is think outside your current belief systems, think about possibilities. So with mind mapping, it not only helps you think outside the box, but when you develop consistent mind mapping practice, you'll start to realize you're living outside of a box. So everything is always fluid. Everything is always possible. Everything is always evolving. Everything is always just connecting, versus just feeling like you're structured in some kind of box of linear processing kind of deal, which is where, again, I think another big benefit of mind mapping is that it allows you to really explore possibilities and opportunities that you may have missed, because you're stuck in this linear process that, all right, A, B, C, D, when it could be A, T, Y, Q,
Yeah, it's like running through running through the Atlanta airport, right? You know what I mean? Exactly. A to T, wait, I should be in B gates. Really quickly, what's the role of the vision board in comparison with mind maps? Because I know that some people, the visualization of a vision board, to me, is very much these are the things that I want, especially with relation to what you were talking about, big play power, like that, the whole idea of this is what I want. I would imagine that the idea of, and this is maybe where mapineering comes in as well, which we're going to get into, is the vision board is kind of like, this is what I want. And the mind maps are like the visualization, the deeper visualization, I would imagine, right?
Yeah. The vision board, to me, which I'm a big fan of, and I've done many of them throughout my life, but it seems like vision boards are static to a certain extent. Right. Once you create it there, mind maps are more dynamic, where you can keep, evolving it. Second point I'll make on that is that, a vision board, doesn't allow for the connectivity to sources and things to create what's on that board, where a mind map, I call them vision maps. now, where I can do the same thing and have everything that I want on there. But by nature of mind maps, I can see how it all connects to certain things all the way down to the activities that need to be done to achieve what's on my vision map versus just cutting out stuff and posting it on the board. Yeah, I'm visualizing it, but where are the how to's to that, and how does that really connect to? And probably the third point I think that I would make on that is, the vision board could be a lot of surface level stuff.
Right.
I want the house, where what I walk through, especially with my kids, when we create a vision map, we go through the what's most important about that, and try to drill down, 5 or 6 levels to get down to the deep surface structure of the desire of what's on your vision map versus just putting you want that. Let's get down to the why you really want that, which will give you that energy, give you that purpose, give you that passion to actually achieve it versus just having it just as some lofty dream.
Right. Well, the goals themselves are static, but the paths are dynamic, right? Like, I think that's the key, right? Right.
Exactly.
What, as we shift into, I want to make sure we cover this before we wrap up. Number one, when did you first get into the idea? Because I'm looking at the dedication to Tony Buzan, who of course passed away a few years ago as we're recording this. But he's widely, I mean, he is the kind of widely the I mean, the mind. It's funny because nothing really is new, and Tony popularized them. I mean, I know they existed before, but the actual mechanics of it and all that, Tony would be attributed to that for sure. What was the first? Do you remember the first mind map you made, or the first time you were introduced to them, and what did that look like for you?
Absolutely. This was, this was actually what my TEDx talk was about, and I just give you a quick short run of it.
We'll link to it in the show notes for sure, so people can watch the talk. Absolutely.
Yeah, it was in the 2007, 2008. I had owned and operated one of the top mortgage brokerages in Southern California from 2000 all the way up until the mortgage meltdown. Lived a millionaire lifestyle, had it all. But then when the recession and mortgage meltdown hit, I literally lost everything: family, house, cars. I mean, everything. I was forced to move back to my mom's. And when I moved back to my mom's, all I did was take with me was my gym bag, my mountain bike, and this big ass box that had all of these motivational tapes, CDs, cassette tapes, and things of that nature that I collected over the years. I knew I had to go back into that box to just figure out, rebuild my life. And in that box was a book by Tony Buzan called Mind Map, the mind mapping book. And never read it. I think one of my colleagues gave it to me, but for whatever reason, it resonated with me at this time. And I just decided to read it, so I read it and decided to mind map all of the contents that was in that big ass box. I mean, Tony Robbins, Think and Grow Rich, How to Win Friends and Influence People. I mean, I spent 3 months mind mapping everything that was in that box. And that was those big poster boards I had over my mom's house. And I started to realize the first power of mind mapping, because all of that stuff started resonating a lot deeper than when I first read it. Most people read books, they underline, highlight. But when you mind map, when you read a book, you're actually hunting and looking for key words to take from that chapter or that book to put on your mind map. So they call that active learning, So I was active learning, and it started resonating with me. Then throughout that process, is my first mind map was this I am mind map, because what I extracted from that whole process, I started to realize that all of the thought leaders in the entire world that, all had one common message, and that was essentially love the life we have. Life is meant to be loved. They all had their different approaches and styles and messages, even prophets, Jesus, Muhammad, Tony Robbins, all of them. They all had their different ways of doing that, but their underlining message was you should truly love this experience of life while you have it. So that was my big takeaway. But then the second big thing I got from that process was the importance of realizing that I do have the ability to decide what love and life means to me and who I am in this life to love my life. So that created what I mentioned earlier is this I am mind map, which was the first mind map that I did on myself was just to really get clear on who I am, what's most important to me, what do I need to do? What do I need to be? What do I need to have to fully love this experience of life that I have? And that was a very, very powerful breakthrough because it changed my energy, changed my vibration, even though I was still homeless and broke, familyless and everything. I had this dynamic energy that 8 months after moving into my mom's house, I landed a $147,000 gig. So I went from rags to riches. So like really quick. And I know it was primarily, specifically due to the fact that mind mapping helped me really sort out who I am in my life to get clear on what I wanted. So I walked into that interview with this vibration of confidence, this vibration of clarity on who I am, which got me that job, which changed my life forever since then. Yeah.
So one thing that I think people dismiss out of hand is that kind of work, that kind of like sitting, and spending time doing the deeper work on that. Earlier today, as we're recording this, I saw on the Pat McAfee show, which I'm sure you probably tune into from time to time, considering it's football is the driver there.
I like that.
He showed the rules that Jim Harbaugh had, the rules that he has, and there are so many people out there that I mentioned to you off the top before we hit record. Bill Walsh's "The Score Takes Care of Itself." There's a lot of like establishing what you really want. And again, when you're in this, looking at the book, what's in your big ass box, how important do you think, and again, we're deviating a little before we dive into the mapineering process, is how important do you think it is for somebody, no matter what they do, to take the time to do that work? And in what way does mind mapping, I mean, you can't see what John's look was right now if you're listening to this, but yeah, dive in, because and the role that mind mapping can play in it. Yeah.
It's critical. I don't really, care what level of success you have, what level of life you're living, where you're at in your life process. Using a mind map, this I am mind map process to really kind of see your life is powerful, because it will open up you to your life like you've never seen before. I don't care if you're a gazillionaire, CEO, or I don't care where you're at in your life. Just by going through this process and seeing your life in this manner, you will, couple things. You will get even more inspired or more blessed and grateful for who you've become. But you'll also see some areas of your life that, you may not have been given enough attention to. Or you may need be, or you may come up with even more ideas on things that, you thought you were fully fulfilled. But by going through this process, you're like, wait a minute, I could take this even another step, to even have a greater fulfillment in this area, just by seeing your life in this component, in this visual diagram is powerful regardless of where you're at in your life, and I really think it's powerful for those, like we had mentioned, college students, when your identity is shifting, you're no longer you're a high school student, you're a college student, or you're no longer married. Now you're divorced. You're no longer employed. Now you're unemployed. You're no longer, now you're a widow, now you're an empty nester. Wherever it is where you find yourself, where your identity is kind of shifting or your life is shifting, being able to reference your I am mind map and I am diagram of who you are, is so powerful, because it serves like your GPS. It's your compass, it's your commandments, it's your personal constitution, it's everything of who you are in this visual form, that you constantly evolve as life evolves. But at least you'll have that master playbook, as we talk football, to know that, all right, regardless of what team we're facing, this is the offense we run.
Yeah.
This is the defense we run. We may have to call certain different plays, but we're not going to just change our whole identity because of the team we're facing. No, this is our identity. This is our, kind of deal. And I think everybody needs to have that, to truly love it and live their best lives.
That's an example of qualitative productivity, the stuff that's hard to measure up front, but the depth and the impact that it has will ultimately affect the work that the things you do, the works that you put out there, which will mean that the quantity of what you do is actually got more value attached to it as well. John, one last question.
Absolutely.
This is a big one. The term mapineering. Let's touch on that, and then if someone wants to get started with this idea of mapineering their life, where would they begin?
Got it. Well, when I started mind mapping back in 2010, just on a personal level to get my life together. And I used it to develop and own one of the United States top mortgage software development companies. I've been developing the infrastructure for mortgage banks for the last 14 years. But then when COVID came and we were quarantined, I decided, you know what, now is the time for me to start sharing this power of mind mapping with others. So I started writing all these books. I got 9 books out and things of that nature. But as I started to learn more about mind mapping from the global context, and meeting people from around the world who are mind mappers and committed to mind mapping, I started to realize that I have been the only one that's been using it more as a personal development tool. Like we mentioned before, most people are mind mapping for project management, brainstorming, note taking, and things of that nature. But I'm using it like for I am process. I use it to help people goal set. I use it to help people get complete on issues with their past. I help people, just more of a personal development, a daily tool that they can use. So I felt that it was important that I create kind of a distinction between, mind mapping that people know of, that people that's ever heard of it, they think of it one way, but mapineering is really to use it more as a personal aid, a personal assistant, a personal tool. So that's the big distinction between mapineering and mind mapping, is that mapineering is more for using your imagination to engineer beautiful mind maps to love life more, is the tagline for mapineering. I created an online community called Mapineerville. It's at mapineerville.com. I'm very excited. It's been growing great from people all over the world that are really inspired to really connect with other people to learn how to use mind maps more on a personal level. We have so many different templates and groups and spaces in there to, again, like I said, help people share requests for help, daily successes. We have weekly ways, activities, teamwork Tuesdays, Wisdom Wednesdays, so many different activities, challenges, polls, and quizzes in there, just for people that are really like, you know what, I like this mind mapping concept and I would like to learn how to use it more on a personal development. I felt it was a good thing to create a community of people, of those like-minded people that can support each other. Again, with the ultimate goal of trying to figure out to love and live their best lives. So Mapineerville is a spot, but also for those who really want to get their arms around this I am process, they're just johndiggs.com. I have like a mini course on there that walks them through it. I actually have a 4-week course that walks people through on how to actually create their own I am mind map, so they can get really, really clear on what, having excellent health means to them, extraordinary wealth, enormous success, and happiness. And we really take time to get down. So at the end of all of that, they'll have their own dynamic I am mind map that they can continue to develop and reference for the rest of their lives. So that's exciting, man. I'm really, really excited about all of that. Just trying to help people. I realize, man, and that the more, like I mentioned before, Mike, that the purpose of life is to love life. And I realize that the more you help others love life, the more you love life. And I realized that the more you love life, the more life will love you back,
Yeah.
So I'm really excited about moving in this direction of really helping people, love and live their best lives, just for that law of reciprocity, knowing that the more people I can touch, move, and inspire to love and live their best lives is ultimately going to come back to me in some kind of way to help me love this little moment of life that I'm having on this earth.
Well, John, it's been great. You've given me a lot of links for people to look up, and we're going to make sure we include all those in the show notes. One last question before I let you go, and I know we've gone a little bit over, but who wins the next Super Bowl? What's your pick for the next Super Bowl? Since we're talking about it, who's gonna meet us? Maybe, it's like, wait, what?
Man, if I knew that, I don't even think mind mapping can help with that. That's one thing mind mapping can help with. But I tell you, why I love the NFL game so much is because we just don't know.
Yeah.
We just don't know. It could be, there's so much parity in the league. There's not really teams that just suck like that,
No.
and there's not really teams that you just know, like back in the 80s and 90s, you knew the 49ers, Cowboys,
Or when
maybe the Packers or somebody.
or the Patriots lighting it up when in the Brady era. But you're right. Like even Mahomes' Chiefs struggled last year. So you're right. And there's injuries and all that stuff. So yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I just thought it would be an interesting. I mean, who would have predicted the Lions almost making it to the Super Bowl last year after so many years of
We just don't know, man. But that's why it makes it so exciting, and that's why I heard it said the other day that baseball was America's pastime, but football is America's present time.
Yeah. What does that make the NBA then? Anyway, and the NHL we talked about right off the top, and we don't know what that makes it. I mean, as a Canadian, I know what it makes it for me. But anyway, John, this has been a great conversation. Where can people keep up with you and the work that you're doing?
JohnDiggs.com. I'm John Diggs all over social medias, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. Anybody that needs any help or have any questions about anything, I'm here for you. I'm really passionate about helping people around this mapping, mind mapping concept and tool. So please don't hesitate to reach out. That goes for you as well, Mike. I'm grateful for this opportunity to talk to you and share with your listeners, and know that I'm always here for you, brother. I'm always here for you if you need anything from me.
Appreciate it, John. Thanks for having a productive conversation with me today.
You're welcome, brother. Take care. Love life.
Thanks to John for joining me in conversation. I am positive that we're going to keep connected because we had a lot to talk about. Well, there was plenty to talk about before we even hit record. And maybe we'll talk after the Super Bowl to see how much parity actually existed in the NFL this year. There was a bevy of quarterback injuries last year. So we'll see. To get all of the links, the show notes, everything that this episode has to offer, go to productivityist.com/podcast528. You can also check them out wherever you get your podcasts. And wherever you get your podcasts, which can include YouTube now, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all that jazz, you can subscribe to the show. That's one way to support it. That way you won't miss a single episode of what's to come and can easily search through the archives. And our next episode is an episode from The Vault. It's my conversation with Corey Poirier. Looking forward to bringing that to you. But again, you can find all of our episodes, the 500 plus, by subscribing. You can easily go back and find episodes that are going to be ones that you want to check out, including ones that also talk about mind mapping. Another way to support the show, of course, is to check out the sponsors that you heard mentioned during today's conversation. Go to productivityist.com/podcast sponsors. Check them out. Click on any of the links for those that resonate with you, and that way they know that we sent you. It's another great way to support the show. Before we go, I want to also thank Keith Elliott for producing the program, Sarah Hayes McBinn for doing all of the administrative and maintenance work around the podcast, and to Soundstripe for providing us with the access to the music that we use during our episodes. Go to soundstripe.com and enter the promo code VARDY10 to get 10% off a subscription. Soundstripe's awesome. I love it, and I hope you'll check it out. That's it for now. Thanks so much for taking the time to join me today. I'm Mike Vardy, the host of A Productive Conversation, reminding you to stop doing productive and start being productive. See you later.